to join and for those of you in our teaching centres to get a comfy chair in the room. So we'll just start in a couple of minutes, but hello everybody. Hi everyone. So we're just waiting a couple more minutes for everyone to get in and settle down and joining us online. Wonderful. Okay, great. Hello, good morning, or good afternoon or evening if you're joining us from other time zones. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the British Council Teaching for Success Conference 2022. My name is Ruth Horsfall. I'm the Young Learner Courses Manager at the British Council in Spain. And we really are delighted to have you all with us today. We're thrilled that finally we're back in the classroom and that you're joining us. Many of you are joining us across Spain, face to face, for some real human, real life interaction that we know that we all love and we've missed so much. So thank you very much for joining us if you're in our teaching centres with us today. We're also very excited that we're delivering a hybrid event this morning. So a very warm welcome to all of you joining us online for our virtual conference. We have a variety of wonderful sessions lined up for you this morning on our online conference, as well as our face-to-face centres. So, hello everybody in Madrid, Somosaguas. Hi in Bilbao, Valencia. Hello there in Mallorca. Hi everybody, and very warm welcome online. So the theme of our conference this year: reflective teacher, reflective learner. And I think that never has there been such a kind of poignant moment for us to have this as our theme in light of the very difficult and challenging few years that we've been through as teachers and educators. And my goodness, we have done a lot of reflecting over the years. So well done for getting here, for surviving. And, you know, I'd like to kind of reflect on a couple of key changes that we had to react to as educators over those past 3 years. And of course, the first one was when we all went into lockdown and we were thrown literally overnight into the virtual universe. It was unavoidable. We were all there and we suddenly had to become dynamic, interactive, engaging online teachers with very little experience of doing that. We were letting our students into different breakout rooms. We had to get to grips with different online tools. We became experts at using Jamboard and other different engagement tools. And we finally realized how to assess our learners in the virtual environment. And then just when we had felt that we were really confident at doing that, and well done, we were then thrown into a whole new challenge, which was teaching and learning in the socially distanced classroom. Sorry to take you back to that time, but then we needed to think about our practice and reflect on how we could continue to deliver a quality learning experience to all of the ages and all of our students while we were in this physically limited space. I'm sure many of you will remember having to teach phonics to early years without them being able to see our mouths, having to plan for the different intelligences in our classroom and think about that physical learner and what activities we can plan for them whilst being limited to a very small space and bubble on our desk. And of course, the relentless requests for, can I use the hand gel dispenser, please, which now is probably part of our classroom management language and language chunks. So all of those very difficult changes made us think and reflect. And I'm sure that you were all impressed and took part in the outpouring of creativity and resilience that came out of those experiences and living through those realities. So really very well done for everything that you did during those difficult times. I'd like to move on now to think about the future and the future of English and the future of the English language teacher and the English language learner. What will our role be in the future? We are already in a turbulent world, geopolitically, environmentally. How will language play out and the English language play out in that world in the future? It's now my pleasure to introduce our plenary speaker at our conference today, Meena Patel. Meena will be talking about the future of English and reflecting on some of those questions about English in the future. Meena is a researcher at the Assessment Research Group at the British Council. Her background is in English language teaching and training. She's worked in the UK, Greece, Thailand and Sri Lanka and Malaysia as a teacher trainer and an ELT projects manager and material developer. She has endless experience, extensive experience with ministries of education in East Asia, and her academic interests lie in the area of English language testing and assessment, and specifically in the area of assessment literacy and the impact of testing and assessment. She's currently a PhD student with Crella at the University of Bedfordshire in the UK. So Meena, thank you very much for joining us today. We're thrilled to have you with us at our British Council Teaching for Success conference this year. It's my pleasure to hand over to you for your plenary. But before I do, just a very quick couple of things to mention to everyone participating today. If you have questions for Meena during her plenary, we would ask that you put them in the chat so that we can pick them up at the end of Meena's session and ask those questions during the question and answer time. So just pop any questions you have for Meena in the chat. And also just to let you know that at the end, my colleague Anne Lennon will be joining Meena on the screen to ask her your questions from the chat. So thank you very much. Enjoy your conference day, everybody. Enjoy the sessions. It's great to have you back with us today. Lovely to have you all out there online. And thank you very much for joining us. So over to you, Meena.
Thank you very much, Ruth, for that lovely, lovely introduction and very warm welcome. Hi, everyone. Can you just give me a few seconds just to get my PowerPoint up and then I'll be with you. Bear with me.
That's great.
Ruth, can you see that?
Perfectly. Yeah.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. So hi again, everybody. Absolute privilege to be here today with you. I'd like to start by thanking my colleagues in British Council Spain for inviting me to present at this conference. I really do feel privileged, so thank you. And I'd like to thank you, the teachers in Madrid, in Palma, in Bilbao, in Valencia, in Mallorca, and online. I apologize if I've missed anywhere, for taking the time to attend. I'm really looking forward to talking to you today and to kind of taking some of your questions later. Today's roadmap. In the next 30 minutes or so, it might be less, depending on how I go. I'd like to talk about English language teaching very generally before the pandemic. And I think Ruth has given us a great reminder of what that was like for us. And the reason I'd like to do that is just to make sure we're all on the same page. Give you an overview of the Future of English project, and that's the one that Ruth mentioned in her introduction, where we're looking at the future of the English language and its implications for education. I'd like to touch briefly on the comprehensive learning system. So all the data and the findings from the project, what do they actually mean for education systems and specifically teachers around the world? And finally, and very importantly, I'd like to talk about the implications for English language teachers as we move out of the pandemic and look to the future. During the presentation, I'll be talking sometimes about global phenomena and findings, and sometimes more about regional contexts that have more relevance for you. So, English language teaching. Let's start by talking about it in very general terms and thinking about resources. And here I'm talking globally, really, just to get us on the same page. So let's look at some of the resources pre-pandemic teachers used to use or do still use. Course books, whether they are local or international, they really provide the backbone of the majority of English language teaching around the world. And there are a variety of them. Boards, be they blackboards, whiteboards, electronic boards, many teachers have access to some kind of board, though not all teachers do, but boards are very popular and a useful resource. The internet, increasingly many teachers, even before the pandemic, turned to the internet for resources to complement their existing practice. And as Ruth quite rightfully mentioned, during the pandemic, where would we be without the internet? Computer labs. So during the pandemic, we couldn't use computer labs. We couldn't because of lockdown and social distancing. But in many countries, computer labs are still a very useful resource for English language teachers, whether it's just to allow their students to use the technology that's available, or whether it's to allow their students to connect to other students in other places. Tablets. In some places, governments are integrating the use of tablets into the classroom as they can be more cost effective and sometimes more flexible than computers or laptops. Mobile phones, more learners than ever before have mobile phones. In India, we were told that during the pandemic, there was an increase in 87% of learners who had mobile phones. And teachers, some teachers around the world, want to leverage on this as an additional resource for them to engage their students, but also to communicate with their students. So that's a very broad overview of the resources. I know that you use many more, but this is just an overview. Oh, sorry. Let's look at methodology. And again, a broad overview because across the world, many different types of methodology, many different types of contexts and resources available. But as an overview, methodologies range from being teacher-centered, being learner-centered, or being learning-centered, or a combination of all of the above. There is no judgment here. I'm just reporting what happens. Many of our teaching practices are assessment orientated. Now, this could be formative assessment, so classroom-based assessment where we use assessment to inform learning and teaching to improve, or it could be helping our students with a test or an exam in order for them to show their achievement, in order for them to progress on their educational journeys. Most teaching pre-pandemic was face-to-face. However, we did do online teaching, it did exist. Online teaching, whether it was fully online or whether it's part of a blended or hybrid course. So within these different scenarios, methodologies change depending on context, but this is a broad overview of the way teaching was done. Then the coronavirus came along. Who could have predicted it? Who would have thought that life as we knew it would change so much, socially, professionally, in every possible way? But who can predict the future? Who really can predict the future? With regards to the English language, David Graddol made a jolly good attempt at it. In 2006, the late David Graddol produced his influential book, English Next, commissioned by the British Council, in which he examined the current and potential future trends in English language learning and teaching. David was looking at 15 years ahead. So in 2006, he was thinking, okay, what's going to happen to English in the next 15 years? And so in 2021, it seemed the opportune time to revisit his work and his predictions. So that brings me on to the Future of English project. But before I tell you about the project, I'd like to ask you just 3 questions. There is a little caveat. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. The first one I will address towards the end of my talk. We don't have time to discuss the answers to the next 2 questions, but if you are attending the Future of English workshop during this conference, there will be an opportunity to discuss with your colleagues the answers to questions 2 and 3. But let me share the questions with you. So what has changed in English language teaching since the pandemic? Ruth gave us a really, really good overview, so thank you for that, Ruth. But apart from having to teach online, what has changed? What has changed for you personally? What has changed for you professionally? It's just worth thinking about. What has changed in English language teaching since the pandemic? I'm going to leave you with that question to think about and move on to the next one. During the next 15 years, the number of people learning English will A, increase, B, decrease, C, stay the same. You might think this is easy, and that's fine, but what do you think? What do you think is going to happen? And as I said, not going to discuss answers now, but you can put them in the chat if you want to. I'm going to move on to the next question. The single biggest change to English language learning and teaching will be in the area of A, technology, B, equity of access, C, assessment, D, pedagogy, or E, other. If you think that A to D aren't the things that are going to change, what else do you think is going to change as we move into the future? So I'm going to leave you with those 3 questions. As I said, come back to question 1 and you can put your answers in the chat. That's absolutely fine. And hopefully if you go to the workshop, you can discuss questions 2 and 3. But I'd like you to keep them in mind as we go through the plenary. Thank you. Okay, so let me tell you a bit about the project. The Future of English project is a multi-stage project which will set a research agenda with global scope but local relevance. The project takes a cross-disciplinary approach to reach diverse audiences. So it draws on research experience and expertise from a range of disciplines, applied linguistics, assessment, practitioners with experience in the field, in various fields, and experts employing futures methodology. In terms of its objectives, we hope that it will provide insights on trends that will define the role of English as a global language over the next decade or so. We hope that the information we collect will help to inform language policy and education reform all across the world. And importantly, we hope that it lays out a research agenda that can generate evidence and data to support those policy decisions and to evaluate their impact. And of course, I know this seems very high level, but all of this has implications for the classroom. So the 3 phases of the project. In phase 1, we looked at Graddol's trends and we evaluated them looking into the future and produced a set of 16 trends of our own based on what we found and based on David's original work. In phase 2, we organised a series of regional policy roundtables And the aim of these was to gather insights and opinions from policymakers and influencers from all over the world to get their input on David's trends, on our trends, but also their opinions. What's happening in your context? What does the future hold for English and English language teaching where you live and work? So having got all of this, phase 3 is a long-term research agenda based on phases 1 and 2. So the whole project is iterative. It builds on each of the phases. So in phase 3, we hope to develop new ways of engaging with global experts like policymakers and academics that we have already done so in phases 1 and 2, but also engage with other key stakeholders that include you, the teachers, that include parents, employers, students, and other key stakeholders that we possibly haven't even thought of yet. And we want to do this to be able to collect data and provide evidence to interpret the trends over time. So this is a long-term project that will have outputs and implications as we go along. The Future of English Research Grant Scheme is a central part of phase 3. We have awarded grants to 4 very large research teams across the world in order to help us gather the data that I've just been talking about, develop the methodology in order to do so. And the 4 research grants we are funding constitute, I think, over 30 researchers who are collecting data in over 40 countries. Each research project will last about 3 years, but as I said, there will be outputs in terms of reports and seminars and conference presentations, and also publications along the way, as well as after the 3 years. It is important to say at this point that we don't claim to have all the answers about the future of English. In fact, we have lots and lots of questions, but we think that's a good place to be in. And what we want from this project as it moves along is to continue and build on the conversation that David started in 2006, but we would like to continue with everybody involved in education around the world. So we've finished phase 1, we've finished phase 2, we are in the middle of phase 3. And what I'd like to talk about in the next few minutes are the findings from phase 2. So we had 14 roundtable discussions from July to December 2021. They involved 92 participants from 49 countries and territories. We chose to talk to policymakers and influencers specifically because at this stage, we wanted an overview of national regional policy, oversight and practice. That said, we always knew that we wanted to and need to talk to teachers and educators and learners. And the research grants in phase 3 and conferences like this one are start of that process. And this is where we hope to begin conversations with you. For the Europe Roundtable, we had participants from Germany, Italy, Poland and Spain. And I'm going to share a few highlights from that discussion with you now. So there were many, many findings from the Europe Roundtable. I've just picked out 4 that I thought were particularly important. One highlight was the status of English, and there was no doubt that in this region, the demand for English is very strong, and there is support for learning English in all sectors and stages of the education system. However, there is recognition that the role of English is changing. English is beginning to be used to meet different needs and different contexts by different stakeholders. So, for example, during the pandemic, you don't need me to tell you that a lot of young people went online. Well, I think everybody went online, but to support their own learning and use it as a platform, not only to communicate, but as a platform for informal education. Employers are seeking different uses for English in workplaces. So whereas before employers relied on standardized testing to gauge the readiness of potential employees into the workforce, now they're asking for more specific needs as well. Multilingualism. This came out as a theme, as a reflection of the linguistic complexity of Europe. Multilingualism is becoming a part of daily life. And so this has implications for identity, for culture, for the classroom. And what does it mean for the classroom? As I said, lots of questions. Technology. Okay, so I am very positive about technology, but for me at the moment, whereas technology is concerned, I have more questions than there are solutions. Technology is definitely an enabler. Where would we have been during the pandemic without it? I couldn't have spoken to my mother or my children, and that would have been disastrous, right? So technology is definitely an enabler, but how do we use it effectively in the classroom to optimize learning and teaching? Is technology a disruptor? In some cases, yes. If you don't have it, yes, it is disrupting your access to life and education. Is it a disruptor in that sometimes it's more of a distraction than a useful tool? And there are questions around the quality, not only of some of the technological products that have sprung up in the last few years, but the quality of provision that uses technology. As I said before, are we using it effectively? Do I use it effectively in my work? Do I use it in the most effective way that is possible? So lots of questions. So these are the four main themes that came out of the Europe Roundtable, and the drivers for these themes. Social media as a platform for communication and informal education, social and economic success in an increasingly multilingual region. What are employers looking for, and where does multilingualism sit within that? And global mobility, that is very important as well. English for global mobility, or languages for global mobility. But what does this all mean for an from an educational systemic perspective? The participants in the roundtable were talking about the context they live in and the systems they work in. The Comprehensive Learning System by Barry O'Sullivan proposes that for learning programs to function efficiently and effectively, they should be seen as a whole system. Within the system, there are three core elements: curriculum, delivery, and assessment. And these three elements must be based on a single philosophy of learning that is supported by clearly defined models of language ability and progression, and underpinned by a model of measurement. And that's where your standards come from. If we fail to ensure that all three are fully integrated in the system and work together, it is likely to lead to a failure of that system. So if one of the areas, curriculum or delivery or assessment, is not working as well with the others, then eventually the system will break down. The system itself does not exist in a vacuum, but instead it is situated within a specific educational and social context. So it has factors that influence it. And these contexts are defined by key stakeholders who comprise that context. Now, we talked to some of the key stakeholders in phase 2. I said that we talked to policymakers and influencers. Teachers are also key stakeholders in the system. And that is why now in this project, we are interested in talking to you, in listening to your views, hearing what you have to say about what's happening with regard to English in your context. So if we take all the data we've collected so far and think about a comprehensive learning system, so if we take those four key things I presented, try and marry them into a system like this, what does it mean for teachers? Let's have a look. Let me just drink some water. All of our data from phases 1 and 2 of the project tell us that teachers are very much at the heart of the educational process and system. They are still very important and always will be, I think. Regardless of mainly the technological shifts during the pandemic, teachers continue to be at the core of teaching and learning. But there are some questions also. In some places in the world, not talking specifically about your region, but in the world, there are concerns about capacity. And where capacity is concerned, there are two questions. Number one, are there enough English teachers to continue doing what we want to do? And number two, are there enough skilled English teachers? And I'll come back to that in just a moment. Then there's technology. I've already talked about it a little bit, but is it a help or a hindrance? Do teachers like it? Can teachers exploit it effectively? In some countries, governments and even teachers are talking about artificial intelligence. But what about those contexts who do not have access at all, who have nothing? What does technology mean for them? Will it enable them to eventually do what everybody else is doing, or will it continue to disrupt their learning and their prospects? And then we have development and training. What are the implications of all of this for development and training? I would say that the implications are both considerable and multifaceted at all levels of the education system. I would say that the implications are at policy level, at institutional level, but most importantly, I would say those implications are at individual level, and I will come back to that. These are very big questions and components in terms of what does this mean for teachers. And as I said, we don't claim to have all the answers, but with the Future of English project, we hope that we can move some way towards helping to answer them. So, having talked about some of the implications for teachers, what are the factors that influence these implications? Policy decisions, I've already talked about these a bit. So they are a big factor though. Decisions about the use and role of English in any one context. The decisions about curriculum, national assessments, materials that we use, some of these decisions are out of our hands, but nonetheless, they have an impact on what happens in the classroom because we either have to comply to policy, sometimes we can complement policy, but these are decisions that the teacher has to make. The learner. Earlier on, I asked what had changed post-pandemic. I asked you to think about that. Well, one answer is the learner. There are many answers to that question, but one answer is the learner has changed. The learner has changed in different ways in different contexts. Data tells us that the learner is more aware of the possibilities and opportunities that are available to them. The data tells us that learner is more engaged in the learning process. Data tells us that the learner is more present in the classroom, whether that classroom is online or face-to-face. That's what the data is telling us so far. There are other very big changes post-pandemic, I know, for English language teaching, but this is one of the big changes, the learner. And for me, it's you, the teachers, who have the biggest influence on yourselves and what happens in the classroom. You really, really are. As we've just seen, one of the things that came out of the data is that you, the teachers, are still at the heart of the teaching and learning process. So let's just explore that a little bit. So I say that teachers are the most important because regardless of all these external factors, regardless of the policies in place or the resources you have or don't have, what you do in the classroom and equally what you don't do in the classroom, the decisions you make, the the decisions you make to accept things, to change things, to reject things, comes down to what you believe about teaching and learning and your role within that. Our beliefs about education generally and the teaching and learning process, and our beliefs about our own professional development drive our practice and hopefully drive our development. Professional development can be institutional and driven by schools and governments, but it can also be personal, driven by our own interests and desire to know more about a particular aspect of teaching and learning. In the previous slide, when I talked about the learner as being one of the biggest changes, I wasn't talking about the students we teach. I was talking about ourselves as learners, taking ownership of what we want to learn, using our agency to be better informed, and improve our classroom practices to help optimize the teaching and learning experience. The three elements you see on the screen feed into each other, inform each other, and now more than ever, we should be asking ourselves, what do I believe about teaching and learning English? What is my role within that? And how can I best achieve what I want to for both me and my students? Thank you, Anne. I've just got 1 more minute to go. So if you ask me what is in store for English teachers looking into the future, my answer is articulating and revisiting what we believe about what we do. Some teachers have never done that, some have. So it's either starting at the beginning or revisiting it. It's about using our beliefs to review what we do in our classroom. So based on what we believe, are we doing what we say we do? And being true to ourselves and at the process. And using the evaluation of our practice to take ownership of the development, our own development, to drive our change. So it's about you teachers taking ownership of the importance that has been placed on you as teachers and having the confidence to be the change you want to see. So when we talk about change, we can look at it in very different ways. We can think of it as something we have to do, something that's been imposed on us. Or we can embrace it and think about it as an opportunity to do the things I'm suggesting. So for me, you, the teachers, are the agents of your own future. And that may play out very differently in your own specific context, but it's about being confident and taking charge. And one way you can do that, you can have your say by taking part in our survey, telling us what you think is the future of English in your context, by sharing your opinions and views. And I very, very much look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Mina. I felt a little bit rude jumping in there, but you did mention that you want to have time to be able to deal with any questions or be able to expand a little. And thank you so much for such a thorough, in a short time, such a thorough sort of overview of the project, the highlights for Europe, and as you said, you've managed to help us in our minds raise so many questions. That comes through to me. There's more questions than answers at the moment, and we're looking forward to being able to find out more. I liked the fact that you said the teachers at the heart, that's what's coming through very strongly through this, through all the research. We've got some questions coming through from our face-to-face conferences, but first I'd just like to start. I'm encouraging people to put questions into our chat, but I'd like to start with one that we were asked before, which is, you've mentioned that teachers should take agency, but how can they do that? How can they begin to take that agency in their own professional development, in your view?
Thank you, Anne, and I really do hope I didn't go too much over.
No, you didn't.
So teacher agency. So I'm going to not only draw on my own experience, so I'm going to draw on talking to the teachers we have done so far throughout the project. One of the ways that teachers have told us that they are finding avenues to develop themselves is peer development. So I know that teachers traditionally, they are scared of having other teachers in the classroom and things like that. But one of the things that teachers have told us that they find easier is actually being observed online or meeting other teachers online, because that medium, that platform is less threatening for them. There isn't somebody in the room for me. I'm just a silent observer. I don't necessarily have to see them. I can't see them because I'm focusing on my students. So peer observation online is a very strong thing that's come out for us. During the pandemic, most English language providers, and I know definitely the British Council, has produced a multitude of courses that teachers can engage in. And I think it's just a matter literally of trawling the internet. There are lots of free resources out there. The other thing that teachers have said to us that they've enjoyed, and I think this differs across context, is the fact that they've attended more conferences and events like this. Because when it's face-to-face, which I love face-to-face events and they're very, very valuable, but they're not always accessible to many teachers because of cost, because of distance, because of travel. So, you know, I know it can be a pain sometimes because it invades your home space, but joining events like this is a wonderful way of just seeing other points of view, seeing other ideas, being able to engage with other teachers in non-threatening ways, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that will give people many ideas, or I think you're giving people the confidence to go out there and try different things as they change. Yeah. We're getting questions through the chat. I'm still waiting to know if you're in one of the centres and you're ready to ask a question, please just let me know. But I have one question coming through our chat, the online chat, about you've mentioned the importance of assessment and how that's changing, and you know, could you expand a little bit on, people are mentioning the fact that continuous assessment isn't in the sort of more formal exams. Can you expand on how you think assessment will change, or what you're finding out from the research?
Yes, whoever said it in the chat. Okay, so continuous assessment isn't always part of standardised tests and exams at the end of the year. But I think what's happened over the last few years, and will continue to happen more strongly, is that many educators and policymakers and influencers are beginning to understand the different benefits of different kinds of assessments. Whereas before, continuous assessment, classroom-based assessment, did not really have the standing it should do in teaching and learning, because people did not understand the value of it. But as I said, I think in my talk, the value of classroom-based assessment is to improve the teaching and learning process. Therefore, students will learn hopefully better, more efficiently, and therefore be able to do their tests better. Now, that's not to say that tests and exams aren't really important. They are, but I think the fact that policymakers and educators begin to see the benefits of the different assessments, that is something that's coming out very clearly. The other thing that's coming out clearly is moving into assessing more productive skills. Yeah. Now, this isn't something that's very new, but it's been accelerated in the past few years. So education systems understanding now the importance of assessing speaking and listening. And it's part not only in an educational journey, but in careers and workplaces. And yes, there's much talk about artificial intelligence, being able to help us with that. But I think that's something that teachers should look forward to, being able to assess speaking and listening and think about it in their own contexts.
It's interesting you say that, because in the chat, I think it was Lucy, we've got Lucy and David saying that it's a feature they feel that many students, many learners in Spain are actually scared of speaking. You know, that it's not the skill that they feel most likely to sort of find easy. So, you know, I think that links to the more that they assess continuously on that, perhaps, the more confidence they gain. And, you know, I don't know if you'd agree. I
think you're right. I think it's about nurturing. I think it's about nurturing those skills, and it's about confidence. It really, really is about confidence. And I think it's about using technology to nurture that. Many young people, not all, many young people more confident speaking through technology, with technology, than face to face. But if we can use that as a springboard to then bring it face to face and increase that confidence, I think that's a very positive thing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think we do have a question from one of our centres now. So Palmer, I guess I don't know who's representing. If you can put your mic and your camera on, the person, or Ali. Ali's got.
Hi, Anne.
Hi, is that Michael?
Hi, this is Michael. Thank you. Firstly, hi Mina. Thank you for your inspiring talk to kickstart the year here in Palma. I think we're all feeling very inspired here and energized to continue the day. But we have a question here from Richard, who's just sat here in front, along with the rest of us here. And he says, you said that the learner after the pandemic is more present than ever. Can you expand on this, and how did you collect this data?
Okay, so I'll start with how we collected the data and then go on to how we know. So the data, as I said, in the roundtables, we talked to policymakers, influencers, some of them were academics, and we're not the only ones doing this kind of research. There's a lot of research going on. Education systems have had to observe what's happening in their context in order to provide for learners and teachers through the pandemic. So a lot of the information has come from there, but it's all over the world. And what we were told during these roundtables, and that's where our data comes from, is that, again, I'm generalizing because obviously it doesn't apply to every learner in the world, but learners are more present in that they are more engaged. They know what they want better than they did 2 or 3 years ago, because they're aware of the possibilities and opportunities. Because of technology, a lot of learners have become more confident. So when I say they're more present in the classroom, I think they're sitting upright and saying, okay, what is it that you can help me with? Because I have some ideas of my own, but I need you to help and guide me and facilitate my learning. And I think that's what I mean by more present, as opposed to previously, we were being told that learners would attend, but not really be present. Does that help? Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for the question, Richard.
Yeah, and hello to everybody there in Palma.
Yes.
It's so nice that we've got people both online and face to face. I think Ali, is there any of the other centres that are ready with a question? It would be lovely to get some questions from our centres in Madrid, Bilbao.
Hello.
Hi, Ali.
Hi.
I'm here with everyone. We're actually seeing you all.
So I'll turn around now so I can ask you the question that's just come in. We've had a question from Maria, and she's asking, how might the role of English as a medium of instruction versus English as a subject change in the future?
The most straightforward and honest answer to that, Ali, though I will provide details, is it will depend on individual education systems. There is a perception globally that using English as a medium of instruction is going to improve English quicker and faster and be better in the long run for learners. There is not a lot of research that backs that up. However, that is the global perception by parents, by many educators, by politicians and policymakers. I think a lot of education decisions, as we know, are really policy decisions. They're about the country as well as the individual. And if English medium education continues to be linked to economic success, which it is at the moment, those policies will stand. But for me, it's not. I think the relevance for teachers is not really whether we teach through EMI or whether we teach English as a subject. It's our perception of how that's helping the learner, and therefore how can we best teach through English or teach it as a subject. The one thing that I will say, and this came out in the globally in the roundtables, though not so much in the Europe one, is that if EMI continues to be used in context, I think that education systems have to increase both the quantity and quality of support that is provided teachers for it, because teachers do need support for it. We all know that teaching a subject through English is not the same as teaching English as a subject, though that is a perception of many people who are not educators.
Would you agree with that? Yeah, lots of nods going on in the classroom here.
I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Mina.
Thank you.
Can I just have a minute, Anne? I just want to close the curtain
yes,
here because I've got the sunshine in my eyes. Give me 1 second, sorry.
Your face, that's fine. No, in the meantime, we'll set up the next question, don't worry. So Valencia has written in the chat, Fiona's representing her group in the group there. And Fiona, it'd be great to see you. Hi, Fiona, and hello to everybody. Nice to see you all.
Fiona.
Hi, Mina. Thanks very much. I have a question from Nina in Valencia, and she's asking, could you expand on the use of artificial intelligence in English learning and teaching?
Thanks, Fiona.
Okay, so even before the pandemic, I think providers were looking at how technology, how artificial intelligence could provide data really to help teachers and learners. Now, because my area of expertise is more assessment, I'm going to talk about that, but then that can feed back into teaching and learning. So in terms of assessment, what's being looked at the moment, apart from remote proctoring for exams, is looking at finding out how we can use technology to assess speaking and listening, for example, because at the moment, assessing speaking and listening is very resource intensive. It takes a lot of time and it's very, it's very time consuming. How can artificial intelligence help us with that? How can we use machines to help us to assess speaking on a mass level? And therefore, how can we use that data then to feed into classroom practice? Does that make sense? So using not the machines to replace teachers, but using machines to gather data by doing some assessment or teaching and using that data to feed back to teachers and education systems and saying, you know what, this is possible, this is what's come out, how can we feed that into our curriculum? So it's not a replacement for, I don't want to alarm teachers, it really isn't, but it's using them to collect information to feed into our practice.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Do we have any questions from our audience in Bilbao or in Madrid? We were looking forward to hearing from you. If you want to put on your camera from Madrid or Bilbao. Seem to have lost them a bit. While they're asking that, somebody asked me how we can get involved as teachers in this project. Is that possible?
Yes, definitely. Yes,
good. I mean, obviously, it's fill in the questionnaire. That would be great. But is there any, is there any other way that we will sort of know about it or be able to participate?
So, getting involved in the questionnaire is brilliant because that helps us know what teachers think and therefore develop resources, seminars, webinars for them. So that number one is very useful. But on a global level, what we hope to do is there's going to be a book published on this project and its findings next spring. So that's one thing to look out for. But based on the responses we get from the survey, we hope to develop lesson plans that teachers can use with their learners. Mm-hmm. So we want to engage learners. We want teachers to be part of this. And lesson plans, like anything else, you take them and you make them your own. So make them relevant for your context. Engage your learners in their own future learning. So we hope to have lesson plans that we will disseminate freely all over the world for teachers to use. But also through our British Council offices around the network, we will have a plan of communication around the project. That may mean small events like this. It may mean workshops for teachers. It may mean being part of conferences. But the main thing I would say beyond this conference, and if teachers are interested, please get in touch with your local centre, who will then let me know, and we can take it from there.
Okay, so, you know, because we've got an online audience, so if, you know, if they don't have a local, it would be the centre nearest them, really, because it's an online, they don't have to go into the centre or anything like that.
They don't have to go into the centre. If you've already clicked on this QR code that you can see now, that takes you to a microsite for the project,
okay.
And you can register your interest there as well. So that gives you information about the project. So keep going to the microsite for updates. But I would say, firstly and foremostly, do the survey, look out for the publication next year, and then keep an eye on the microsite to see what's out there for teachers moving forward.
Those would also, information about the project would also go through our Teaching English site as well, the British Council.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so that's one that probably people know. So the microsite and the Teaching English, that's fantastic. Right, we have, I haven't yet heard from Bilbao. We've got a couple of minutes left. I don't know, I know Luis and I think it's Rebecca there. Maybe they're probably busy talking about it themselves, or Madrid, but I think we've answered most of the questions that have come in. Yeah, Mina, you've got a question.
One thing while no, I don't have a question. I just wanted to pick up on, I think, Richard's question from earlier about the learner, if I could just elaborate a little bit. So I finished my presentation by asking teachers to be confident about taking ownership of their own development and learning. And one of the things, just to add to my answer to Richard's question, was I think it's really important, and I know teachers are aware of this, but to understand the transition that learners will have to make from being online to being face-to-face. And whereas some of them will come with that confidence and be present in that classroom because they've done more, they've known more, they've explored their options, there will be some learners who, like many teachers, will need to ease into that transition and be helped with their confidence. So I am making very general statements. I think for me, just keep an eye on your learners and help them to inform your own learning is what I would say.
Well, thank you. That's a wonderful way to finish. And I'll borrow Michael's words and say, really, for me, this has been an inspiring way to start our conference. I think we could sit and talk about it all day. There is so much to talk about, but thank you so much for giving a great overview and encouraging us to join in by doing the questionnaire, and mostly by maybe starting the conference by saying to teachers, really, we are at the heart of the learning system that's going on, and you know that our continuous development like this conference can help our learners and ourselves. Thank you, Mina, and we wish you a lovely afternoon.
Lovely.
And we'll see you in other talks soon.
Excellent. Enjoy the rest of the conference, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye. And we hope we see you in the next talk.
Yes.
Bye.
I can do this. Bye. I can do a virtual clap.
Thank you, Michael.